Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue with the shorter test type problems that are small enough that they could be put into a multiple choice format. So here we have a company rents a building with a total of 100,000 square feet, which are evenly divided between two floors. The company allocates the rent for space on the first floor at twice the rate of the space on the second floor. The total monthly rent for the building is $30,000. How much of the monthly rental expense should be allocated to the department that occupies 17,000 square feet on the first floor? Okay, so there's a couple ways we can think about this, but we will have to use, once again, allocations, because we're going to allocate based on square footage. But then they threw in this added twist that we're going to have the first floor allocated to twice as much as the second floor. So that's how we're going to have to think through this. A couple different ways we can think through this, but we know that the total rent is $30,000, so let's just put that down at this point. We know that. And we know that the square feet are 100,000. So that's the square feet. And what we're going to basically do, what I'm going to basically say is the square footage we would think would be even. So we would think that the first floor, we would have the 50,000 of that 100,000 square feet, and the second floor would have the other 50,000. Now we need to account for something. The first floor is going to have twice as much square footage. So one way to do that, if we're trying to think about the ratios, is how I'm kind of think through it. I can say, well, let's basically say that there's twice as much square footage, or the square footage on the first floor accounts for twice as much. That's one way that we can basically do this allocation. So that means that the first floor is basically worth the 50 times 2, or 100,000. And the second floor is just going to count for 1 square footage, so we're just going to keep that at the 50,000. So if we add those up, I'm going to say the sum of those means that we're basically saying, kind of like we have 150 square feet. That's not exactly right. I'm just basically saying that the first floor counts as twice as many square feet as the second, because we want to allocate twice as much to the first floor. And the reason we can do that now is now we can basically have a ratio. So this is how we want to break it out. We can say that if we were going to take the ratio being the 50,000 divided by the total 150,000, then we got this 0.333. If we do that in Excel, it would be this 50,000 divided by the 150,000. And it's not 0 because we need to go to the Home tab. We need to go to the Numbers group and either add decimals or make it a percentage. Now, once again, Excel is going to basically see it as 0.33 there, but it's really going to calculate based on 0.3333 on forever. So keep that in mind as you go if there could be a rounding difference here. Now, if we did the same thing up top, we'd say it would be the 100,000 divided by the 150,000. And if we make that into a percentage as well, then we got the 67. And of course, those add up to the full 100%. So if we were, or 1 or 100%, which we'll put and make a decimal. Okay. So if we were to allocate to the entire first floor, it would be 33,000. Now we're allocating to just one department on that floor, which happens to have 17,000 on the first floor. So of the square footage, we have the 17,000. And remember, it counts for twice as much. So we're going to say every square foot is basically accounting for twice as much the way we are weighting it. So we're going to say this equals the 17 times 2. It's equal to 34,000 of that amount. So now we need to take the ratio of the 34 divided by the total square footage. So we took the square footage that was there, we doubled it for it to fit within our calculation for our ratios to double weight the first floors. And then we're going to take the 34,000 that is this one piece of the first floor divided by the total square footage. And that will come out to here, we're going to go percentage 23. So we're going to take now the total square footage dollar amount, the 30,000, and multiply that out. So we're going to say this is 23% times the 30,000. That's going to be the allocation to this one department on that floor, 6,800. Next one says the corporation reported the following financial data for one of its divisions for the year. Average investment assets are $485, sales of $975, and income of $111,000. Income, I'm assuming, being like net income versus sales, being the sales. And the investment turnover is what? So the investment turnover is going to be the sales divided by the average invested assets. So that's what it's going to be. I'll go ahead and center that so we can say that's the formula that we're going to be using. Now it's just a matter of plugging in our numbers. So we've got the 975,000 over the average investment assets, which actually they just gave us to be the 485,000, and that will be our ratio that we need to calculate out. Now note that if you're looking at actual financial statements, it's not usually going to say average invested assets. It might say that on a problem like this. A multiple choice type problem could have that kind of terminology. If it doesn't have that on the financials, you got to take basically the beginning balance and then plus the ending balance and divide it by 2. That would be the average. And we're basically trying to see what would be the investment kind of at any given point throughout the year. And note that, of course, the balance sheet is a point in time. So to get the beginning balance, we might use the prior year's ending balance to have this year's beginning balance, and add up that and the ending balance and divide it by 2. So if we just divide this out, we're going to say the 975,000 over divided by the 485,000. That gives us 2, but we need to add some decimals. I'm going to go back over here, add some decimals. It's about 2.01. Next one says the following is a partially completed lower section of a department expense allocation spreadsheet. It reports the total amounts of direct and indirect expenses for the 4 departments. Purchasing department expenses are allocated to the operating department on the basis of purchase orders. Maintenance department expenses are allocated based on square footage. Compute the amount of maintenance department expenses to be allocated to Department A. So part of the issue of this problem here is they basically gave us more information than we really need. And instead of us allocating to the 2 departments, which could kind of almost give us a check figure, which it could be easier in some ways, they just asked for the 1 department, that department being Department A. So I'm gonna highlight that, and I'm gonna say that we need the square footage. That's what we're gonna use here. So we're using the square footage, and we're allocating the maintenance here. So that's what these are basically the main kind of numbers we're going to use. We're gonna use the same allocation method. We're just gonna say that we have the 2 departments that have square footage, F and A, and we need to use this ratio again. We're gonna do our ratio thing again, and we're gonna say that F has 3.9 and A has 2.1 of square feet, and that's what we're going to use for our allocation basis of maintenance. So if we sum those up, then we get a total of the 6,000. That's just the 3,009 plus the 2,001. Let's indicate that calculation with an underline in the home tab, the font group, and underline. So then we're going to do our ratios. So I'm going to take out the calculator just to show us. It's going to be the 3.9 divided by the 6,000. And that's the 65% if we move the decimal 2 places. And so let's do that here with a formula. This equals to 3.9 divided by the 6,000. When you first start doing these types of ratios, they could be a bit intimidating, but they're always going to be set up the same way. And if you set them up, I like to set them up vertically like this, then they make sense. The 2 ratios should always add up to 100. That way we know we're allocating the total dollar amount out. I'm going to go ahead and go to the home tab, number, and make that a percent. I'm going to do that for these 2 cells as well. So I'm going to go to the home tab, I'm going to go to the number, I'm going to make that a percent. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, just to have the check figure. So we're going to take the 2,001 divided by the 6,000. That gives us the 35, and of course that should add up to 100. So here's our allocation then. Now we need to take the dollar amount and just allocate it based on these allocation numbers, knowing that we're going to add up to 100% of whatever the dollar amount is between these areas. So I'm going to go ahead and underline this again, font, our home, font, underline. Oh, not that one. I wanted to underline this one. So home, font, underline. All right. And then we're going to multiply that times the dollar amount of 252 for Department A. So we're allocating this maintenance to Department A, and we're using this 35% in order to do that based on the allocation from square footage. So we're just going to take this 35%, 0.35, 35% times 25,200, giving us 8,008. Next one says that company allocates administrative costs to its respective departments based on the number enrolled, while maintenance and utilities are allocated per square foot. Based on the information below, what is the total amount of administrative costs to a department if Administrative costs were 70,000, maintenance fee 14, and utilities 7,000. Okay, and this is another one where they kind of give us almost too much information. So let's narrow down what we're actually looking for is the allocation to Department A here of this 70,000. And we're going to use, to drive that allocation, the ratios we're going to use are going to be the enrollments here. So once again, we get to use our ratios. We're going to use our ratios. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing. I'm just going to say these are what we are going to use. Let's copy those and paste them here. And I'm going to retype these in. So we got 140, 80, 60, 50, 330. Now, if we have Excel, we might as well do the entire ratio calculation. I'm going to take this 330 just to recalculate so you can see what that is. That's the sum, of course, of the 140, the 80, the 60, the 50. Now, if you have a time constraint, I'm going to go to the Home tab, Font, Underline. Then you just want to take the ratio of the 60 to the total. And if you're doing it by hand, you have a time constraint, you just want to take that. But let's take a look at the entire thing. And if you have Excel, we might as well. So we could take the 140 divided by the 330. And I'm going to absolutely make this an absolute reference here by hitting F4 twice or once, I guess, and that just puts a $sign by both. And that just means that no matter where I go, copy the formula, it'll copy the relative formula. So I'm going to copy the formula down. Well, first I'm going to highlight these. I'm going to go to the Home tab. I'm going to go to Numbers and make that a %. Now I'm going to copy this formula down and then go back and see what it does. And I'm just going to copy this down like so and see if it does what I want it to do. What do I want it to do? I want it to take this 80 divided by the 330. So it does. So it moved this relative cell reference down, but it did not move this one because of the absolute reference. And so same thing here and the same thing here. So now we can basically prove to ourselves that we didn't do the math wrong by summing these up. And if you have the time, that's always a good idea to do. And if you're efficient in Excel and you have Excel available, it's definitely doable in a fairly short amount of time. So now we just need to take Department A, the one we're concerned in here, multiply that times our 70,000, the amount that we want to allocate out, 70,000, and so we can then take the 18% times the 70,000, and that will give us the 12. Now, we 12, 7, 27. Now, you could check that all the way across. If we take this 70,000 and we wanted to double check that number, then we can also say, okay, I want to take this times this all the way across, just so we can make sure that we're allocating correctly the entire 70,000. If we add those up, then it should, of course, add up to the 70,000 here. So that's another check that you could run if you have the time to do so, to make sure that at least you're allocating the entire dollar amount and not making some mathematical error.